What would you do if an elderly woman, dressed in a janitor's uniform, walked into the lobby of a luxury building, only to be told by security to use the service entrance through the basement trash hallway, just because she didn't look like someone who belonged there? No one knew. She was the one who drew the building's very first blueprint. No one remembered. She had once been the lead architect before quietly walking away after her name was erased from every record. She didn't fight back. She didn't sue. She didn't say a word. She simply returned with a broom, a new name tag, and a memory no one dared to face. This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about memory, justice, and the silent guardians of an entire system's soul. And it begins with a locker marked 12B. Thomas Everly stepped out of the rusty delivery truck at 5:58 a.m., wearing a silver gray work uniform with no company logo, a low-pulled baseball cap that shaded half his face, and a pair of mud-caked boots he had deliberately left uncleaned. He was in the service basement of the Altura complex, the headquarters of the corporation he had been appointed CEO of just 6 weeks earlier. But no one here knew that. The only identification on his chest was a small name tag, Tom, Junior Technician. Just as planned, Thomas had decided to spend 21 days undercover within his own company, starting from the lowest position, B1 basement level, in the maintenance and janitorial department. He stepped into the stifling corridor of the technical wing, where flickering fluorescent lights cast a cold blue hue over raw concrete walls. There were no greetings, no leather chairs, or barista coffee like upstairs. Down here there was only the sound of brooms sweeping, water dripping from corroded pipes, and the smell of floor chemicals mixing with industrial dust. As Thomas fumbled around looking for his locker, a heavy cart suddenly rolled toward him from the hallway bin. Pushing it was an older black woman in a faded janitor uniform, her gray-streaked hair tied neatly behind her head, her movements firm and silent. Thomas stepped aside to let her pass, but the hallway was too narrow. Her shoulder brushed against his. She paused and glanced at him briefly. Her eyes were bright, deep, and unwavering. "Watch your back, newbie," she said softly, then continued pushing the cart without waiting for a reply. He was about to respond when a sharp voice rang from down the hall. "Carter, you're not allowed in the West Tech wing this morning. New directive came in today." It was Grant, head of security. The woman, Carter, stopped but didn't turn around. "There was an oil leak near the main circuit last night. I'm checking it before it eats through the sealant." Grant frowned. "That's not your job. You just clean the corridors. Let the tech team handle it." She didn't argue, not a word, just turned the cart around. As she passed Thomas again, she looked at him. "Rookie, huh? You'll get used to being told not to do the right thing." Thomas saw the embroidered name on her chest. L. Carter. He didn't know why, but that line kept echoing in his head all morning. Get used to being told not to do the right thing. By noon, Thomas had been taught how to replace vent filters, mop epoxy floors, and handle rainwater drains using mild acid. No one on this floor knew he was the CEO. A young technician named Javier was assigned to work alongside him for training. Javier was Mexican-American, 35, with 3 young kids and working 2 jobs to pay off his wife's hospital bills. He worked and chatted as if Thomas were an old sidewalk buddy. Thomas quietly took mental notes of everything. Around 3 p.m., Thomas made his way to the break area behind loading dock B, where the lockers were located. His locker was 17B, right next to 12B. As he struggled with the combination lock, he noticed Lila Carter sitting on the wooden bench, holding a small notebook. Her rubber gloves were laid beside her, and she was sketching something with a blue ink pen. These weren't random scribbles. They were precise parallel lines, diagonal patterns, evenly spaced segments. Thomas couldn't help but glance over. He recognized it immediately. A technical diagram, almost identical to a sub-level floor schematic. He cleared his throat softly. She looked up and gently closed the notebook. "Hello there," he hesitated. "Were you drawing?" She looked at him but didn't answer right away. "Sometimes I need to visualize things. Drawing helps me think." "It looked like a design plan." She gave a quiet laugh, one with no cheer in it. "Old habit. What's your name?" "Tom." "Short for Thomas?" He froze. She tapped her temple with a finger. I remember names. And shoes. Your shoes don't belong down here. Thomas looked at his boots, scuffed up on purpose before arrival, but they didn't compare to hers. Soles worn thin, a small cut along the edge, a blotchy gray tone. Shoes of someone who had climbed thousands of maintenance steps. I guess I'll get used to them. Number, you don't need to get used to them. But the shoes, they'll get used to you. She stood up and tucked the notebook into her locker. Just then, Grant walked in with a clipboard. Carter, there's some water near the server stack 3 cluster. Handle it. I already mopped that zone with anti-slip this morning. It's not dry yet. If someone slips, it won't just be a skinned elbow. Grant raised an eyebrow. You questioning orders? I'm just stating what I observed. Good. But your job is to mop, not analyze. She didn't respond. Quietly, she pushed her cart away. Thomas watched her go. He asked Grant, is she always that detailed? Grant smirked. Carter? Been around since this place didn't even have a ground floor. Thinks she knows everything. But she's just a janitor now. Should have retired ages ago. But no one's had the guts to fire her. That evening, Thomas sat in the cramped break room, staring at the task assignment board. L. Carter's name didn't follow a fixed rotation. She was regularly assigned to zones involving core systems, main power rooms, conduit shafts, high-risk zones. Unlike other janitors who rotated weekly, she remained tied to areas most people avoided. It struck him as unusual, not because she worked differently, but because of how the company seemed to place her. As if they silently acknowledged she was the only one who understood those places deeply enough not to screw them up. And then he recalled the last thing Grant said. No one's had the guts to fire her. That wasn't a defense. That was a delayed threat. Thomas left that day with dirty shoes. But in his mind, a very clear thought emerged. She doesn't belong to this floor. Maybe this floor belongs to her. Day 2 began as Thomas Everly entered the basement of Altura Complex earlier than anyone else. It wasn't yet 5:45 a.m. The fluorescent lights hadn't fully switched on, and the locker corridor was as silent as a wartime tunnel. But he wasn't early because of regulations or to impress anyone. He came for locker 12B, more specifically for the woman who had stood beside that locker yesterday with a notebook full of hand-drawn technical schematics, something that shouldn't exist in a place where everything ran on software, digital blueprints, and KPIs. He hadn't slept the night before. The vague sensation from his conversation with Mrs. Carter had lingered like a raw wound on his mind. He had met many remarkable people in the industry, eccentric inventors, brilliant engineers with obsessive attention to detail, but never anyone like her, not because she was good, but because she was so good at hiding it. There was a strong sense that she was holding on to a very big secret, and what unsettled him the most wasn't that she kept it. It was why she chose not to tell. Thomas stood in front of his own locker, 17B, but his eyes stopped at 12B. Mrs. Carter's locker was unremarkable. A steel door with a faint scratch on the lower corner, a nameplate barely legible but still readable, L. Carter, etched in faded letters. But what made it special wasn't on the outside. Yesterday he had glimpsed inside, a layer of documents wrapped in plastic pressed against the edge, and a dark blue notebook. What he couldn't forget were the drawings, hand-drawn, precise, meticulous, with technical lines so accurate that even a CEO who had reviewed dozens of structural projects was momentarily stunned. They weren't the drawings of a janitor. They were the drafts of someone who had once coordinated design at the core structural level. The sound of cartwheels echoed from the north stairwell, the familiar rhythm of someone who had taken that route thousands of times. He didn't have to look to know it was her. Carter arrived early, just as he had expected. She pushed the utility cart as usual, her steps steady, eyes sweeping the floor like a radar scanning for imperfections. She saw him, unsurprised, just gave a slight nod. Early, huh? Guess I had late coffee. Don't use the coffee machine on level G. I warned them about the water line back in 2023. Now the water smells metallic, but they still use it. The kettle's broken too, but no one's replaced it. Thomas gave a dry chuckle. Sounds like you run the whole building. I don't run it. I just remember more than most, she said, then opened locker 12B. He noticed a small detail. When she pressed her hand against the lower left corner of the locker door, there was a faint click. Not loud enough for most people to catch, but for him, a man who once helped design emergency hinge systems for 3 smart building platforms, that was the sound of a secondary lock mechanism. She pulled out the notebook, the one he had seen partially yesterday, and gently flipped it to a specific page. He couldn't see it all, but he saw enough. A pipeline system diagram, annotated with neat handwriting in black gel ink. Technical arrows, unit codes, all formatted like official drafts from a senior design engineer. "You like drawing?" she asked without looking up. "I used to design some projects in Atlanta, mostly industrial plants." "Then you'll understand this. Some details never make it into the official blueprints, not because they're wrong, but because no one listens to the person drawing them." That line made him pause. There was something in her voice beyond bitterness. There was memory. She didn't have to say it outright, but it was clear she had once been a designer. By lunchtime, when he returned to the break room, the first thing he saw was Mrs. Carter's notebook sprawled open on the table, with the red pen cap still off. Zoe, the blonde intern with the know-it-all attitude, was smirking. "Who even draws this stuff by hand anymore?" Thomas walked over silently. The page was a schematic of the basement steam pressure system, something only someone with deep knowledge of the infrastructure could draw. "Do you understand any of it?" he asked. Zoe shrugged. "She must be into retro stuff. I think there's an error here. Look at this line." She marked it with the red pen. Thomas furrowed his brow. "An error?" Number that was a detailed note on dual heat-resistant structure. A technique abandoned because it wasn't approved in the year 2000. But if it were used, it would cut maintenance costs by 40%. That wasn't an error. That was engineering ahead of its time. Lila walked in at that exact moment. She didn't say anything, just looked at the table, at the red pen, at Thomas, at Zoe. "Every line I write is a way to remind myself I still remember. Every time someone touches it without asking is a moment I have to choose between keeping it or throwing it away." Her voice wasn't raised. She wasn't angry, but the room turned cold. Zoe looked away. Javier dropped his eyes. Thomas picked up the notebook and closed it. "I'm sorry, I should have left it alone." After everyone had left, Thomas stayed behind in silence. He looked toward locker 12B. Mrs. Carter stood a few meters away, wiping down an electrical cabinet. He asked without turning his head, "You designed this entire level, didn't you?" She didn't stop wiping. "I used to have my name in the blueprints, but not anymore." "Why haven't you told anyone?" "Because around here, staff lists change faster than the drainage pipes. And the truth, when it's locked in a cabinet, doesn't offend anyone." "But don't you regret it? Do you regret standing inside a building where they forgot who laid the first brick?" That question stayed with him all afternoon. As night fell, Thomas returned to the locker corridor. No one was there. He placed his hand on the edge of locker 12B. Just lightly, just to feel it. And in that moment, he was certain. That locker didn't just hold a notebook, gloves, and paper towels. It was the black box of a silenced legacy. And the woman, whose worn shoes had stepped over blueprints before they were even conceived, was the only one still holding the key. Day 3 began with the stench of sewage and the clang of metal echoing through basement B like an unwelcome symphony. Thomas had just stepped into the technical lobby when he heard Javier panting from the end of the corridor. "Main pipe zone is flooding. The shutoff valve isn't working." Without asking questions, Thomas ran after him. Along the way, he saw a group of young technicians fumbling in front of a secondary control panel, sweat beading on their foreheads, eyes full of panic. One shouted, "Does anyone have the 2005 blueprint for Zone B? This year's version doesn't show the auxiliary circuit." Another snapped, "They removed the basement's drainage map from the new schematics. Damn architects axed the backup pipelines." Thomas pushed into the group, not even managing to speak before Zoe appeared from the far right corner, holding a pressure gauge but clearly clueless how to use it. "I don't get it. According to the system blueprint, the secondary drain is under the technical stairwell. But in real life, that's just a solid wall." That sentence confirmed everything. The current blueprint didn't match the physical layout. He was about to speak when a voice came from behind. not loud but firm enough to make the entire group turn around. The backup drain is behind the false wall in the old equipment storage. The auxiliary pipe crosses behind that and empties into the lower-level treatment system. It was Mrs. Carter. Holding a mop, her uniform still damp with yesterday's moisture, she stepped into the center of the flustered engineers as if it were a path she had walked 100 times. Every eye turned to her, including a visibly annoyed glance from Zoe. "And how do you know that?" "Because I drew it." The words froze the air for a split second. Then a short laugh came from Marcus, the senior engineer on the morning shift. "You're just a janitor, aren't you?" Lila didn't reply. She looked at Thomas. Her gaze wasn't pleading, nor explanatory. It was simply the look of someone who knew she was right. Thomas turned away. He veered toward the west corridor and pulled open the door to the old equipment room, long locked for being non-functional. Just as she had said, behind the steel shelves was a false panel, lighter, with a seam near the floor. He pressed the left edge. The panel clicked. A hidden door swung open, revealing a narrow, damp passage with a medium-sized pipe running diagonally. The secondary drain system was still intact. He turned to the group. "Who's got a flashlight? Follow me." Whatever doubts had lingered drained away like the water now being channeled into the safe outlet. Moments later, the auxiliary drain was activated, and the water began to recede, exactly as Mrs. Carter had said. No digital blueprint, no software, just the memory of the person who had drawn it. Once the incident was under control, Marcus cleared his throat in front of everyone. "Next time, we need an updated site map." Lila looked at him. "It doesn't need to be new, just accurate." The group fell silent. Thomas stood beside her, realizing for the first time that she lived in a world where her personal memory was the only reliable database left. Later that morning, Thomas found an excuse to stop by her locker. Not to snoop, he would never cross that line. But as she opened it, his eyes caught sight of a faded yellow folder. Mostly auxiliary structure sketches, hand-drawn, dated over 2 decades ago. "You kept all of these?" "I kept what I bled to finish." "You used to work in the design department?" She was quiet for a moment. "I used to sit in the conference room on the 18th floor, but after a restructuring, that position no longer existed for me." "They fired you?" "Number. They moved my name to the list of no longer aligned with company culture." "And you accepted that?" "I didn't have a lawyer, no stock options, just drawings and memory. I chose to keep what I knew best." Thomas picked up one sheet. In the bottom corner, small text read, "L. Carter, Draft 1, System B Flow Revision." A chill ran down his spine. This was no longer a suspicion. This was proof. She had once overseen the core systems of the entire facility. That afternoon, Thomas found a way to talk to Zoe. The young woman, still unsettled after the morning's technical rebuttal, was defensive. "You think she's some genius? Just because she remembers a few old schematics?" "Number, I think she's the person whose work we're all standing on, without ever acknowledging it. No system works for 20 years without failure. If she's so great, why has no one mentioned her name? Because sometimes a system doesn't need to be wrong. It just needs to forget who was right." Zoe had no response. At the end of the shift, Thomas returned to the basement. Mrs. Carter was still mopping the floor, gloves on, head down. He stepped closer. "I want to make copies of your drawings. I think they should be archived. Officially." She didn't look up. "Copies are fine, but if no one believes where they came from, they're still just paper." "I believe." "What's your title that your belief gets written down anywhere?" Thomas didn't answer, because if he revealed his true identity, the entire act would collapse. He simply said, "I'll find a way." That night, back at his temporary apartment, Thomas sat surrounded by a stack of old technical documents that Mrs. Carter had agreed to let him borrow. Not because she trusted him, but because he had promised to return every single page without losing a single drop of ink. He read each diagram like a man deciphering an ancient map. Every detail matched the physical structure, even explaining engineering issues that had gone unresolved for years. And in that moment, Thomas understood. He wasn't just witnessing a professional injustice. He was facing a systematic erasure of contribution, where the person who laid the foundation was demoted to scrubbing the floors she had once designed. And more than that, she never demanded her glory back. She simply guarded her memory with a mop, a hidden pathway, and blueprints tucked behind a faded steel locker door. Some names don't disappear because they're erased. They disappear because people collectively agree to their disappearance, as if silence could erase existence. But Thomas Everly wasn't the kind to stay silent, especially not when he knew that the name erased once sat at the very center of everything his company operated on every single day. After the water leak incident was resolved thanks to Lila Carter's memory and unofficial blueprints, Thomas spent the entire night researching Altura's old technical document storage system. His objective was precise: to find the original design files of Basement Level B from the years 1999 to 2001, a foundational phase during which, according to Lila, she had been a lead design contributor. If she was telling the truth, and by now he had no reason to doubt it, then the name L. Carter must have appeared somewhere. And if it no longer did, then someone had deliberately removed it. Thomas started at the physical archives on the 6th floor, a place rarely visited except by legal staff or during audits. He used a technical override badge to enter, the badge issued to him under the identity Tom, Emergency Compliance Technician. Under the weak yellow glow of the archive room lights, hundreds of document boxes stretched across the decades. He opened each box, each file. Familiar names: Wells, DeMarco, Linhart, Fowler, but no Carter. He searched through auxiliary schematics, handwritten notes, internal meeting minutes. Finally, in a folder of secondary drainage plans from the year 2000, he found a draft with a handwritten line crossed out. Draft by L. Carter. Thomas's hand trembled slightly. This was the first trace. Someone with the initials LC had been part of the structural revision team for Basement Level B, a team authorized to alter the core structure. The name was crossed out. No explanation given. No one disappears from history this cleanly unless someone wants it that way. He recorded the document number. Thomas then returned to the internal server, using the temporary credentials granted to the Process Improvement Task Force. There he found the 2001 schematic for Basement Level B, the prototype for 3 later commercial designs. One annotation box was locked, accessible only by higher clearance. But when he used the admin account he had created years ago as vice president, something no one expected him to remember, the screen revealed a line of metadata. Author, L. Carter. Status, obsolete. Her name appeared 3 more times in other notes. L. Carter Design Draft, archived as legacy. Carter Method, replaced by Lynn Meyer Redundancy. Carter's name removed from formal circulation, per Wells memo, June 2nd. Wells, Clayton Wells. Thomas jotted it down quickly. Clayton Wells, formerly head of engineering, now chief operating officer. Still in position. Thomas realized this was more serious than he had thought. That night, he didn't go home. Thomas went to the internal IT department and requested full access to Tier 1 archival files. As CEO, he had the authority. But what he found made him sit down, motionless, for nearly 5 minutes. An internal record, unsigned, requesting the deletion of all backup documents bearing the signature L. Carter to be relabeled as Draft Anonymous during the 2005 system migration. The stated reason: to avoid copyright duplication during the core technical adjustments under the new plan. Retain only official documents signed by members of Tier 3 management. The next morning, Thomas did not return to the basement as usual. He wore a suit, clipped on his CEO badge, and walked straight into the Monday morning executive board meeting. In the room were 8 individuals, representing finance, operations, legal, and communications. Clayton Wells arrived 3 minutes late but smiled as if the meeting were a formality. Once everyone was seated, Thomas stood. No introductions needed. He projected the first slide, a 2001 blueprint of Basement Level B with the signature L. Carter in the corner. A wave of murmurs rose. One person glanced at Clayton, another looked at Thomas. Someone in this room requested the deletion of all this data from the system. Someone circulated an internal memo claiming a woman named Lila Carter played no role in the design process, and for 20 years, she has mopped the floors of the very structure she helped build. No one said a word. He moved to the next slide, a photo of Locker 12B, pictures of her hand-drawn plans, snapshots from the recent water leak incident, and the hidden auxiliary passage not found in any system. The only person who saved Basement B that day was the only one who understood it before a single brick was ever laid. The room fell silent. Clayton remained quiet, but his expression began to change. Thomas didn't name him. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew. Instead of accusing, Thomas softened his voice. This isn't the time for blame. It's the time for repair. He turned off the screen and looked directly at the board members. I propose we reinstate the name Lila Carter in all official design documents. I propose we appoint her as an honorary advisor to the engineering department. And I propose we launch a new initiative called the Underground Builders to recognize those who built from the shadows. That afternoon, Thomas personally returned to the basement, where Lila was inspecting a water leak near the server room. He stood there for a long moment before speaking. Did you ever think about reclaiming it all? She didn't look up. Number, I don't need it all. I just need my memory not to disappear. But the company needs to know who really built it. You don't need to do anything for me, Tom. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for the truth. Who are you, really? I'm the one who's going to put the name Lila Carter back where it belongs. She looked up. For the first time since they met, she smiled. Softly, not guarded, not withdrawn. Just a simple nod, as if finally, after 2 decades, someone was willing to turn back to the page they once tore from the book. Not everyone disappears completely. Some people leave traces, like pencil marks still visible beneath erased lines on an old document. And sometimes all it takes to awaken a truth buried for 2 decades is a whisper from someone who still remembers. 3 days after the board meeting and the quiet exchange in the basement, Thomas Everly began his next journey, to find the people who once worked alongside Lila Carter during her time as a design engineer at Altura. She refused to give names. Those who once stood beside me have either left or learned to stay silent. But Thomas wasn't going to stop, because he believed technical memory once passed through hands in sketches could never be fully buried. Based on old HR records, ones he had just ordered restored from encrypted archives, Thomas found a list of 12 engineers once assigned to the Altura Core Draft project in 1999. Among them was a familiar name, Walter Dean, head of drafting for seismic safety, retired in 2011. He lived in the suburbs of Springfield, Missouri, nearly a 4-hour flight from New Jersey. Thomas didn't send an email. He didn't call. He booked a flight and went there in person. Walter lived in a small house with a wooden porch and ivy-covered walls. Nothing like what one would expect from a man who once led design at a billion-dollar corporation. But when Thomas arrived, he knew he was in the right place. The man who opened the door had messy silver hair, thick glasses, but sharp eyes. You're Tom? No, wait. Thomas Everly, the new CEO of Altura? Thomas nodded. I need to speak with you about Lila Carter. That name made Walter pause. He opened the door wider. Come in. Inside a modest room filled with old technical maps, college trophies, and black and white photographs, Walter poured 2 cups of black tea, then sat on an old leather armchair worn at the armrest. I thought no one would ever ask me about Lila again. Thomas listened. He didn't interrupt. She wasn't just good. She had an engineering intuition I've only seen in very few people. She could spot structural faults computers couldn't. The first time I worked with her, I told Clayton, if this company knows how to listen, we're looking at the future chief designer. But the company didn't listen. Thomas put his cup down. I found the original blueprint with her name, crossed out, replaced with draft committee. Walter nodded, lips trembling slightly. I'm the one who was told to cross that name out. Who told you to? Clayton Wells. Said Lila had opposed the new thermal load model. She wanted to keep the old tiered structure, claiming the new system would cause uneven expansion. And she was right. 2 years later, half the walls on level D developed hairline fractures. But by then, she was no longer on the team. Thomas frowned. Why didn't anyone speak up for her? Walter didn't make eye contact. Because at the time I was already tired. And because siding with a black woman, without shares, without legal counsel, did nothing good for the career of a white engineer about to be nominated for management. The words dropped into the room like a concrete block, heavy, untouchable. But Thomas knew. This was the confession he needed, not to assign blame, but to clarify. I didn't come here to make you feel guilty. I came because I need a witness. History won't correct itself unless someone confirms it was distorted. Walter nodded. What do you need me to do? Write it down, sign it, and if you're willing, appear in the Underground Builders program. Walter closed his eyes for a long moment, then opened them. Lila was the only one back then who stood up for me when I was wrongly blamed for a gas pipeline error. I owe her this. I'll do it. 2 days later, Walter appeared at Altura with an old fabric bag, inside of which were dozens of hand-drawn blueprints from 2000, all signed LC, or Lila C., and on 3 originals, a note, Core Structure Improvement Proposal, coordinated by technical team, supervised by Walter Dean. Thomas submitted the entire collection to an independent verification team. The result? Every diagram matched the current infrastructure. Not a single detail was incorrect. Everything Lila had drawn was accurate. At the following week's internal meeting, Thomas presented all the evidence, this time not just in slides but with Walter's own voice, recorded in a video taken at his Springfield home, speaking of the truth that had long been ignored. When the video ended, the room was silent for a long while. Then came a round of applause, not the kind to celebrate, but the kind that released years of buried shame. Among those who stood were current engineers, even Zoe. That evening, Thomas returned to the basement. He brought with him a plaque to be installed on the main wall of Altura's technical department the following week. It read, Basement Level B Foundation Design, 1999 to 2001. L. Carter, architect, the one who laid the first brick. Lila looked at the plaque, then at him. You didn't have to do that. But the company did. They'll forget again. Maybe, but this time, there's video. There's a name on the record, and there's someone willing to confirm it. This time, you're not alone. She reached out and touched the corner of the plaque, where L. Carter was engraved into the metal. A faint smile appeared. If Walter has spoken, then maybe I should share a bit too. Thomas sat down, saying nothing. Lila spoke for the first time about a meeting 23 years ago, where she stood in a room full of men presenting her plan to prevent core structure cracking, and was interrupted 4 times before she finished her first sentence. She recalled being asked to have a private meeting to explain why she had used an algorithm she herself had created, instead of the department's standardized documentation. And she described the afternoon Clayton removed her from the design list with a single sentence. We need someone who fits the project culture better. When Thomas left the basement that night, he carried a notebook. Lila had lent it to him. On the first page in faded blue ink, it read, If one day someone truly wants to know what happened, I hope they're patient enough to listen. The day Walter Dean officially appeared at Altura's technician meeting marked a strange dividing line between generations. Those who had witnessed Lila Carter being pushed out of the project, and the newer generation who only knew Basement Level B as a finalized blueprint stamped long ago. This wasn't just a difference in age, it was a difference in the ability to recognize who had once been erased from the story. And then, things began to unravel. Not in a boardroom, but in the staff break room on Level G, where a conversation between a young engineer named Dylan and a longtime technician named Arlo accidentally touched a taboo. The quiet divide in culture between inheritors and foundation builders. Who's Lila Carter? Why am I only hearing that name now? Dylan asked as he popped open a soda can, eyes glued to his phone. Arlo, wiping grease from his arm after a maintenance shift, paused. She's the one who saved Level D from collapsing. Dylan chuckled. I thought that was Wells' project. And as Arlo was about to respond, the floor supervisor of Level G, Colleen, walked in. That's not true. Wells proposed the core upgrades. It's in the 2001 archives. That's incorrect, Arlo replied evenly. I reinstalled the sensors based on Lila's hand-drawn schematic. Wells never set foot in the basement once. The break room went silent. Dylan looked up for the first time. You mean the official records are wrong? Arlo just nodded. He didn't say more. Rumors traveled faster than the internal elevators, and soon the new class of engineers, mostly recruited from prestigious internship programs, began asking questions. Not because they pitied Lila, but because they realized that if someone like her could be erased, then their current contributions could also become invisible. At the same time, Altura's HR department began receiving unusual requests, inquiries to access old personnel records, technical archives from 1999, and especially meeting minutes signed by Clayton Wells regarding the basement level B project. Linda Ross, head of HR, who had worked under Clayton during her early years at the company, felt a chill. She remembered some of those documents were never digitized. For some reason, they were kept in hard copy and labeled not for electronic system. Linda called Thomas. "You're digging into a part of this company no one wants touched." Thomas replied with a single sentence. "We've left it buried for too long." That very evening, Thomas organized an emergency internal meeting. Only senior managers who had worked at Altura for over 15 years were invited. Conference room 3, 12th floor. Doors closed. On the screen were two documents: the 2001 design signed by Wells and Lila Carter's technical proposal, with the same schematic. The only difference was the signature in the lower corner. Thomas stood without using a slideshow. He looked at each person in the room. "I didn't call this meeting to make anyone apologize. I called it to remind you her name deserves to be here." The current chief technical officer, Janine Keller, once a protege of Clayton Wells, was the first to respond. "We can't confirm that document as final if it didn't go through the technical council at the time." Thomas paused for several seconds. There were 5 members on that council, weren't there? Including Walter Dean, the man who just signed a declaration stating that document was authored by Lila. "So my question is, how much confirmation is enough?" The room grew heavy. Then an older man with streaks of gray in his beard, Robert Klein, nodded quietly. "I was the one who scanned the archives in 2005. I remember Lila's file because it was handwritten with blue ink notes attached. I don't know why it was removed from the system, but I confirm it existed." That sentence struck down every justification HR had ever offered. Immediately after that meeting, Thomas authorized the reinstatement of the Altura Core Project Historical Archive as part of an effort to make the company's internal history transparent. But the consequences didn't stop there. Several major shareholders began emailing questions. Will revisiting company history affect brand image? And on an online engineering forum, a post titled, "The Woman Who Built the Basement You're Standing On and Got Erased," began circulating thousands of times within just 2 days. The story of Lila Carter was no longer Altura's alone. It had become a wider conversation within the construction engineering industry about who deserves credit and who's forced into silence for not being a cultural fit. On Level E's coordination floor, the young engineer Dylan sat in front of a control board Lila had once designed. He stared at the schematic, realizing for the first time that the small handwritten marks, LC, were still there, never erased. He turned to Arlo. "Why didn't you talk about this sooner?" Arlo sighed. "Because sometimes silence is the only way to keep a job. But now, if you want to speak, then speak." Dylan stood. He opened the team's design software, typed a few lines. "Legacy Foundation Schematic, originally proposed by Lila Carter, remains fully operational after more than 20 years." And he signed his real name. It was the first time since graduating college that he had ever written his name beneath the name of a woman he'd never met. But he knew, if he didn't, that name would disappear again. Just like thousands of others who once left behind their labor and were never remembered. No one expected that the anonymous complaint letter appearing on Tuesday morning would be the match that ignited everything hidden beneath the surface at Altura. The letter was printed on plain paper, no signature, no return address, just a single handwritten line in black ink at the bottom of the page. "I saw him delete her name from the system." Attached was a printed log of data edits from 2002 showing the user ID CW_admin, Clayton Wells. The silence in the internal administration office shattered. Thomas received the letter from Linda Ross. He said nothing, walked straight to his office, closed the door, and didn't emerge for 4 hours. When he did, he was holding a report nearly 60 pages thick, detailing the full history of all edits related to the Basement B project. Thomas didn't call the press. He didn't summon the board. He did one thing, printed 12 more copies and sent them to each senior executive, along with a single note. Read to page 37 and see who really wrote the first line of code for the basement B pressure control system. Page 37. The first line, drafted by L. Carter. Beneath it was a handwritten code segment, scanned from the original, with neat rounded lettering, interspersed with annotation marks, a style of notation used by only one person in all of Altura, Lila. At this point, those who had remained silent began to stir. But one person said nothing. Clayton Wells. The man currently held the title of honorary advisor, a role without authority but rich in symbolic value, often featured at Altura's anniversary ceremonies as the founding architect of modern technical foundations. But the foundation he built perhaps wasn't made of engineering, but erasure. The atmosphere inside Altura headquarters felt like the early hours before a storm. Engineering teams whispered about page 37, printed copies circulated in break rooms, slipped out during night shifts, even forwarded via internal email with disguised subject lines like database integrity review. But no one could mistake the admin signature, CW_admin, a username assigned to one person only, Clayton Wells, during the 2002 internal data restructuring phase. Some members of the tech team immediately challenged the authenticity of the file. The CW admin account could have been accessed by anyone, one middle manager insisted in an internal group chat. But then, the only person who could definitively confirm it, Walter Dean, spoke. Number that account was set up by me, secured with dual authentication, physical keycard and voice ID. Only he had access. A single emotionless message, but enough to silence the entire chat. By the end of the week, on a U.S. engineering LinkedIn forum, an anonymous account posted a short blog titled, "The Untold Story of the Woman Who Drew the Basement Blueprint." The article was brief, only a few hundred words, but included a scanned image of Lila Carter's handwritten code. Within 24 hours, the post garnered nearly 200,000 shares, along with thousands of comments from young engineers, feminist advocates, and former Altura employees. Silence was no longer an option. Thomas called for a full-staff leadership meeting, but this time, not in an office. It was held in the main ground floor lobby, the very place where Lila Carter had once been told to use the service entrance because she didn't have a permanent badge. Thomas stood on a small platform, microphone in hand. "We built a tower, a symbol of engineering and resilience. But if that foundation was built on forgetting, it won't hold. I propose formally to reinstate Lila Carter's name in the system with the title co-founder of the Basement B project." The crowd remained still. Then came applause. Slowly, yet not everyone applauded. In a corner, Janine Keller, Clayton's successor, held her phone and left early. Hours later, an article appeared in Altura Voice, the company's internal journal. The headline, "History Shouldn't Be Rewritten by Emotion." Author, Janine Keller. Thomas didn't respond publicly, but he knew. The greatest enemy of truth isn't lies. It's those who use ambiguity to preserve power structures. That's why he did what came next, something unprecedented at Altura. He invited Clayton Wells. The meeting took place in a ninth-floor conference room. No cameras, no press, no junior staff. Just Thomas, Clayton, and a printed copy of the 2002 document, with the note, drafted by L. Carter. Clayton entered, composed. "I suppose you want a confession?" Thomas didn't smile. "I want an acknowledgement." Clayton met his gaze. "You think my career was built on stealing credit from someone else?" Thomas answered calmly. "I think your career was protected by erasing the name of someone who couldn't fight back." Clayton leaned back in his chair. "You'll never understand the pressure of maintaining a brand. Some people, like Lila, no matter how talented, don't fit the image. A janitor who wanders into the boardroom can't be the face of Altura." For the first time in the meeting, Thomas interrupted. "No one wanders into a boardroom they designed." Clayton squinted. It was the first moment he didn't have a response. He simply stood. Before leaving the room, he turned back. "If you think putting her name on a plaque will save Altura's reputation, then good luck." As the door closed, Thomas understood. This battle was never just about a missing name. It was about the system that allowed it to be erased. without anyone ever asking why. The hallway was silent except for the faint buzzing of fluorescent lights. It was 6:17 a.m., a time when most Altura employees were still brewing coffee or just pulling into the parking lot. But not Dorian. The young systems analyst had returned to the office early with a single goal in mind. His mind hadn't stopped spinning since the scan of Lila Carter's handwritten code had leaked onto the company's internal network the previous week. Dorian had only met Lila once, a fleeting moment, when she helped fix a jammed printer in the break room 3 years ago. Back then, he had no idea she had once been an engineer, let alone the architect of the most complex pressure regulation system Altura had ever deployed. But something about her calm presence had stuck with him. And now, amid whispers of corruption, erased names, and a widening gap between those supporting the truth and those clinging to the old regime, Dorian felt pulled into something far beyond his job title. He walked straight toward locker 12B. Few people remembered it. It had once belonged to a field technician named Jorge Vega, Lila's closest collaborator, now deceased. Rumor had it he'd left behind a personal folder marked confidential for personnel security reasons, never properly archived due to a restructuring. The locker had been untouched since 2008, but Dorian had done his homework. He'd found an old partial record on Jorge in the archive system, including a redacted note titled, "Letter to LC, draft not sent." That was enough. He submitted a quiet maintenance request to check infrastructure wiring. It was approved in under 6 minutes. No questions asked. And now the key was in his hand. Dorian took a slow breath and inserted it into the rusted lock. The mechanism clicked heavily, the sound echoing down the empty corridor. In that moment, he hesitated, as if opening this locker would unleash something far beyond a stack of forgotten documents. And in truth, it would. Inside was a stack of yellowing folders, held together by brittle rubber bands that had long since cracked. On top lay a thin envelope, the edge marked in faint pencil. Vega Carter Draft. Private. Dorian pulled it out carefully, as though the moral weight of Altura's legacy rested inside. Inside the envelope was a folded piece of paper, the handwriting shaky. "Lila, I told you not to trust Clayton with the original code. He didn't just refactor it, he repackaged it. I've seen the new proposal. Your name is gone. Mine barely shows. This isn't optimization, it's replacement. I'm documenting everything. If anything happens, look in locker 12B. I won't let this be rewritten." Below that was a list, timestamps, system logs, even screenshots of the very tool Clayton used to wipe the original author metadata. Dorian's fingers trembled. This wasn't just evidence. This was the smoking gun, clear, specific, undeniable. He put everything back in the envelope and closed the locker, heart pounding. By 8:12 a.m., the entire contents of locker 12B had been scanned, uploaded, and submitted via a newly established internal protocol Thomas had activated himself, Project Ledger. It allowed employees to send evidence directly to the board in a secure and urgent manner. Dorian hit submit, entered the two-factor authentication code, and leaned back in his chair. He didn't know what would happen next, and here's what did. By noon, 3 senior engineers who had quietly backed Clayton were placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. By 2 p.m., the board convened an emergency meeting, and at 5:37 p.m., Jorge Vega's letter was pinned to every internal digital bulletin board, accompanied by a new official memo from Thomas. "We are not rewriting history at Altura. We are correcting it. Effective immediately, Lila Carter is reinstated as co-author and chief systems architect for the entire Phase 2 module." 2002. The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was reverent. Something profound had shifted, but the twist wasn't over yet. That evening, an anonymous former Altura employee leaked Jorge's letter to a freelance journalist named Kira Vaughn, renowned for exposing corporate cover-ups. The story appeared on Nextscope the next morning. The engineer they tried to erase, it exploded. Within 48 hours, hashtags like Jarsha Remember Lila and Jarsha Locker 12B flooded LinkedIn, Reddit, and Twitter, X. Engineers from across industries began sharing their own stories of having their names erased, their innovations repackaged, or being sidelined for not fitting the executive mold. Lila Carter became a quiet icon, not because she fought, not because she spoke up, but because she endured, outlasted, and finally reemerged, like the foundation they once denied. Inside Altura, the culture shifted. Employees printed Vega's letter and taped it to their desks. In the cafeteria, someone placed a small photo of Lila next to the strongest coffee pot, with a sticky note that read, "She's even stronger." And Lila still hadn't said a word. She hadn't appeared. She hadn't issued a statement. She hadn't updated a single line in her employee profile. But something was coming. Something even Thomas hadn't expected. Because the real twist, the final seismic shift, was still waiting in another document. Jorge had mentioned it in a small note at the bottom of the page. Lila didn't just write code. She designed the entire fallback system. Even Clayton never understood it. The schematics in my secondary log, Locker 14C. If you're reading this, that's where to go next. And just like that, the future of Altura shifted again. Not through a press release, not through a shareholder briefing, but through a whisper from the past, left behind in a forgotten locker by someone who believed that the truth should never die in silence. It all started with something very small. No one paid much attention that morning when, in the bottom right corner of Altura's internal system interface, a countdown appeared. No announcement, no explanation. Just red numbers on a black background, ticking down second by second. Some employees thought it was a display glitch, but within an hour, every Altura branch across the United States, from Atlanta to Boise, from software development offices to design research centers, showed the same countdown. And those who had worked at Altura long enough recognized the interface. It didn't belong to the current system. It was a remnant of the old internal OS, decommissioned since 2011. No one knew who had reactivated it, but it clearly didn't appear on its own. By 9 a.m., Slack and internal messaging channels exploded. Code snippets leaked, urgent chats flew, and suddenly a phrase spread like a virus. Lila is coming back. Someone referenced the final message Jorge Vega had left behind. Some claimed it was just a prank from someone in IT. But at 9:15, the screens in all major conference rooms automatically switched to standby broadcast mode. A black frame appeared with a line of text. Livestream begins in 00:45:00. Thomas Calhoun received a direct call from the Deputy Director of IT. The man, sweating profusely, could only repeat one sentence. "I can't delete it. It's embedded at the system code layer, encrypted with an old standard we can't crack." On the top floor of Altura's Seattle headquarters, senior leaders rushed into the strategy room. Maximum network security was deployed, but no one could trace the stream's source. The server wasn't listed among connected devices. It was like a ghost, existing within the system, yet located nowhere. Eventually, they decided to leave it, hoping the live stream would end as just another digital hoax. They had no idea what was coming would rewrite the history of the entire company. At exactly 10 a.m., the screen flickered. Then the feed began. It wasn't a pre-recorded video. No animations, no title, no logo. Just a dim room, lit by yellow light from a ceiling lamp shining down on an old wooden table. Sitting at the table was a woman with gray curly hair, a light gray sweater, and work boots. No designer brands, no makeup. Not seated on an expensive leather chair, but on a foldable plastic one. She sat upright, holding a thick folder, her eyes not fixed on the camera, but aimed straight at the hearts of thousands watching from their screens. She didn't introduce herself, didn't greet. She simply opened with a sentence that made every office space fall silent. "I was once the lead engineer of Altura's first-generation automatic compression system, but my name has never appeared at any recognition ceremony." That woman was Lila Carter, the one whose name had been erased from every internal document, the one who was demoted to maintenance in the very building she designed, the one who walked away from the company carrying nothing but memory. And now, after 20 years, she had returned, not for revenge, but for remembrance. She opened the folder, sheet by sheet, schematics of the early G2 systems, handwritten margin notes, hers, pressure leak predictions, precise to the decimal, matching current unresolved system failures. She didn't place blame. She didn't name names. But each image shown on screen was a slap to years of institutional silence. She spoke of how her team was fractured by credit reallocation policies, how ideas were relabeled, and how email threads were accidentally deleted. Yet instead of bitterness, she repeated one truth. Recognition isn't about glory. It's to make sure no one else has to go through what I did. The company chat erupted. Young engineers flooded the feed with messages. One wrote, "I didn't know who you were, but now I know who I work for." Another wrote, "My boss once told me I was too emotional. You're the reason I didn't quit." And then, the twist happened. The camera widened. Behind Lila, in the shadows, 10 others stepped forward. Each held a design, a device, or a piece of code. They were former engineers, designers, and interns who had once been pushed out. Some were Asian, Latinx, indigenous, or were fired without explanation for not fitting company culture. Now they stood behind Lila, not demanding credit, but to prove that history cannot be muted. Lila didn't cry. She only said one line that melted every heart. "We are not here to be forgiven. We are here to remind you. Altura was not built by one person, but by the names you chose to erase." The screen slowly faded. A final message appeared, simple. "We never left. We were just waiting to be heard." Friday, 7:42 a.m. Just hours after last night's explosive livestream, Altura was no longer the same. The main lobby, once a quiet space where employees greeted each other with casual nods, was now filled with whispers, wary glances, and a strange sense of disruption. On the LCD screens throughout the hallways, instead of the usual internal PR videos, a still image was displayed. An older woman, salt and pepper hair, a soft smile, eyes deep with meaning. No one had to ask who she was. Everyone had seen the video. They had heard the name Lila Carter. And now they were beginning to recall scattered memories buried beneath years of a system that had erased her. The moment he stepped into the office, Thomas Calhoun realized things were spiraling beyond control. His office phone wouldn't stop ringing. 3 calls from the head of communications, 5 urgent emails from the board, and a single text from his daughter, who had never once shown interest in his work, containing only 4 words. "Dad, have you seen it?" He turned on the TV. The screen lit up with a special segment from Morning Ledger, led by a headline in bold red. "Forgotten by her own company, Altura faces its past," accompanied by footage of Lila Carter scrubbing the floor. Over haunting piano notes, the anchor narrated every moment of the livestream, from when Lila was once called an internal intruder to her fierce and unshaken silence, ending with a quiet exchange between her and a young colleague, a clip that had made millions weep. Thomas sat motionless. Though the office lights were fully on, the room somehow felt darker than ever. He glanced at the screen beside him, a private group chat among Altura's regional directors, where messages poured in like a flood. "Is this real? What have we been hiding? Who's responsible? I remember her from San Mateo. She helped me fix the elevator. I thought she was just a maintenance worker." Elsewhere in the city, little Ellie, the girl who had first seen Lila denied entry into the lobby, was now sitting with her mother in their kitchen. On her old laptop, Ellie opened a photo folder titled "People I Like." Among blurry pictures of classmates, teachers, and pets, there was one file labeled "Ms. Lila, Real Hero." It was a candid photo Ellie had secretly taken of Lila smiling at her the day she picked up a fallen box. Ellie clicked post. In the caption, she typed just one sentence. "This is the face of dignity. I saw her before you did." No filters, no hashtags, no shares. But within an hour, the photo reached the front page of a major nationwide student forum. From there, it exploded. Less than 6 hours after Ellie posted the image, the phrase, "the face of dignity," began trending across social media. Not just on Twitter, Reddit, or niche blogs, but on mainstream platforms like CNN, NBC, and the New York Times. A senior editor at Time magazine shared the photo with the caption, "Not every hero wears a cape. Some carry a mop and a memory." Immediately, reporters began investigating Lila Carter and uncovered a chilling truth. Altura's official HR database had no record of her. A woman who once held the title of chief architect, who had signed off on the company's very first safety vault design, had been completely erased from its history. At the same time, a group of former project engineers began uploading photos of old blueprints bearing the signature L. Carter and handwritten annotations pulled from regional archives. The yellowing sheets of paper, once forgotten, had now become irrefutable evidence. Pressure mounted against Altura's leadership. That same morning, an emergency meeting was called. Inside the eighth-floor conference room, the tension was razor-sharp. Thomas sat at the head of the table, silent. In front of him lay a thick stack of documents: employee complaints, requests for an internal investigation, letters from shareholders demanding transparency, and a printout of Ellie's photo, enlarged to A3, taped to the corner of the table. The director of external affairs finally spoke up. "We need an immediate response. Either a public apology or a full admission of wrongdoing." Another executive interjected, "We can't let the media control this narrative. We need to reclaim it." Thomas slowly removed his glasses. He looked down at his hands. In them was a folded piece of paper, a handwritten letter from Lila, left inside locker 12B. He unfolded it. The penmanship was neat, slightly trembling. "If you still have your memory, use it. I don't need recognition. I need justice. Not for me, but for those who were never heard." He looked up. "We're not going to control the story." The room fell dead silent. "We're going to listen to it, receive it, and change." A press conference was held 2 days later, but this time there was no grand stage, no podium, just a simple row of white folding chairs placed in the courtyard where Altura's first blueprint had been drawn, by Lila, when she was still a summer intern. Thomas Calhoun stood there beside a large frame poster that read, "The Unknown Builder." He gave no speech. Instead, he played a short film, composed of old security footage, clips from the live stream, staff sketches, and Ellie's narration. At the end, he invited anyone to share a memory of Lila. No one was prepped, no one was pressured, but dozens stepped forward. A security guard recalled the time she brought him lunch after his father passed. A young engineer remembered how Lila helped him fix a power outlet in silence, then left a note in blue ink that said, "Good job." A former janitor choked up, "She was the only one who said my name right." The ceremony ended with a simple gesture. A small bronze plaque was placed outside the conference room, engraved with the words "Legacy Room" in honor of Lila Carter. And internally, the company launched a new cultural reform initiative called the Dignity Project. Every quarter, employees, regardless of title, would attend an unrecorded listening session where anyone could share stories that had never been acknowledged. A new design standard was born, called the Carter Code, which ensured that every Altura structure included a hidden element bearing the names of laborers who directly contributed. No more designed by CEO, instead, built by real hands. Inside the old metal locker labeled 12B, a replica of Lila's personal notebook, containing sketches, notes, and unfinished thoughts, was placed with care. It would not be displayed. It would only be opened once a year during the March listening session, commemorating the day Lila walked away from Altura. They didn't build a statue. They didn't paint a mural. They let her live in memory, just as she had asked. No noise, no proclamations. Just recognition, timely and deep enough. A company doesn't truly change because of media outrage. It changes because of a face nobody remembered, yet now nobody could forget. The face of dignity. 4 months after Altura's historic reform, a new building rose at the southern edge of the company's campus, on the very spot where an abandoned overflow parking lot had stood for years. Now, instead of a dull gray concrete wall, there stood a modest but elegant glass building, and in front of it, etched into a white stone base, were the words, "The Lila Carter Center for Memory and Equity." In the morning light, that name seemed to glow. Not flashy, not grand, but quietly reminding everyone of a woman once dismissed as the cleaning lady. There was no red carpet, no professional MC. The dedication ceremony began with the soft sound of piano music coming from a corner of the courtyard, played by a boy who had taught himself. He was the son of a maintenance worker. On a temporary wooden stage covered in wildflowers and grass, no one wore suits or blazers. Instead, shirt sleeves, aprons, work jackets, old uniforms. They were people who had once worked alongside Lila, and they stepped up one by one, not to deliver speeches, but to share little stories, forgotten memories. One person recalled how she had once left a note in a drawer. Starting today, clean in figure eights. The tiles will wear out slower. Another remembered that Lila had been the first to leave clean water bottles at the South Rest stop, where people were often forgotten. No one raised their voice, but every word brought silence to the crowd. And then, a special moment. Ellie, the girl who had once posted the viral Face of Dignity photo, was invited to the stage. She wore a light brown coat, her hands trembling as she held the printed words she once wrote. Slowly she read, "I didn't know who she was, but when I saw her cleaning the floor and I saw her old shoes, I felt she was the reason this place was clean and safe, and someone should put her name on the wall." Today they did, and I just want to say, thank you, Ms. Lila Carter. A round of applause followed, not loud or triumphant, but like a soft pat from the heart. Right after, a man in a light gray coat stepped forward from the back of the courtyard. He wasn't on the list of speakers. Security started to move, but Ellie signaled them to let him through. The man stood there, holding a worn-out baseball cap. He looked up at the words Lila Carter Center behind him, then choked up. I'm her son. I wasn't there when she passed. The entire courtyard froze. He continued, I used to be angry at her for refusing to start over, for not going back to school. She just wanted to clean floors. I called that a failure. I cut ties with her. But today, I understand. My mother wasn't a janitor. My mother was the one who kept this culture from collapsing. Then he walked over to Lila's memorial portrait placed at the center of the courtyard, knelt down, and laid his head against it, not crying, just breaking open like someone who had finally seen what they couldn't before. That moment, strangely, wasn't sad. On the contrary, it left everyone there feeling healed. Someone patted his shoulder. Someone rested a hand on Ellie's back. Someone quietly took a photo of the scene and wrote, "This is how you build a center from memory, not money." After the ceremony, Jonathan, the CEO of Altura, stepped up to the stage. He didn't read a speech. He simply said, "We used to build systems with KPIs. Now we build them with memory. The Dignity Project will expand, starting tomorrow in Chicago, Denver, San Antonio, and elsewhere. Listening rooms will open, where workers, servers, guards, everyone has the right to tell what has never been heard." Then he turned toward Ellie. "Because if a 10-year-old girl can see dignity in an old pair of shoes, then a whole company can learn from that too." As the crowd began to disperse, some stayed behind. A young employee named Malik walked up to the glass doors engraved with the words Center for Memory and Equity and placed a small photo against it. In the photo was him and his grandmother, who had also been one of the first-generation cleaning staff. He whispered, "Grandma, your name isn't on this wall, but today I see you everywhere." And so the center named after Lila wasn't just a place to remember, it became a place to begin what had never been told, to honor those who had never been believed, to hear the voices that were once dismissed, now finally being listened to, not to start a campaign, but to start a society that knows how to pause, how to bow down, how to remember. That morning, the man wearing dusty shoes stepped into the main lobby, one last time. No longer needing a disguise, no longer needing to pretend, but still keeping the same demeanor, quiet, graceful, and punctual. Jaden didn't carry a briefcase like he usually did. Instead, he only had a small cloth, folded neatly in his coat pocket, along with a crumpled slip of paper he had kept for years. That slip, written by Lila's own hand, bore a trembling yet firm line. "Remember who you clean for." He walked past the rows of chairs that had once witnessed countless moments of employees turning their backs on her. Today, the executive floor was quieter than usual. Something was waiting. A different feeling hung over the building. 3 days earlier, after a board meeting, everything changed. A resolution had been passed without a single dissenting vote, something that had never happened in Nova's history. The entire board had unanimously agreed to reopen personnel records from 1991 to 1998, with the goal of restoring the honor of those who had been erased without clear reason during a harsh restructuring period. At the top of that list was the name Lila Carter. The HR department spent 3 days tracing all the data: old documents, electrical layout drafts, interior design projects, and construction photos of basement level B, all revealed Lila's clear role in shaping the fire safety systems, emergency exits, and efficient operational proposals. All of them had once been approved, then later had her name removed intentionally. Based on a 1997 meeting transcript, it became clear that the board at the time had deliberately replaced her name with that of a newly appointed young director, someone who had never even stepped foot on the construction site. When the truth came to light, the media responded. A headline in Modern Facility Weekly read, "She mopped their floors, but she drew their exits." Engineering communities and labor equity groups began sharing the story en masse. The hashtag number Lila Blueprints began trending rapidly, accompanied by scans of her hand-drawn plans, marked with neat, round handwriting and unique symbols that only insiders would understand. A professor at MIT published a 3,000-word paper analyzing the decentralized spatial thinking she had applied back in the early 90s, far ahead of many modern concepts. And so, on that day, Jaden returned to where it all began. Not the executive office, not the boardroom, but the basement restroom, where Lila had worked silently for nearly 15 years. There, he installed a small brass plaque with the inscription, "Lila Carter Maintenance Hub, dedicated to the one who remembered." There was no ceremony, no ribbon to cut, only an old security guard who stopped, removed his cap, bowed respectfully, and continued walking. Then Jaden made his way to the old storage floor, once Lila's domain. New managers had turned it into a record archive, but today Jaden asked them to reopen the small room at the far end, the one where Lila had kept her tool cabinet, marked faintly with 12B on the wall. When he opened the rotting wooden door, a ray of light filtered through the crack, highlighting faded pencil marks from the past, a lighting diagram, emergency routes, and a taped-up floor map of level B. Jaden stood still, then gently wiped the dust off the old schematic with his cloth. He turned to a young technician standing behind him and signaled, "Scan everything. Preserve it. Don't change a thing." That afternoon, every Nova employee received an internal notice. Tomorrow, all branches will pause work for 1 hour in the morning to remember someone who once walked these hallways in dusty shoes. We are not pausing to grieve. We are pausing to remember and to follow in those footsteps. The next morning at headquarters, a line of people stood silently in the lobby, not to greet guests, but to listen to a recording. Lila's voice, recovered from a 2002 interview in the archives, played through the speakers. "My job doesn't need to be noticed. But if someone today made it out of a dangerous situation, it's because of something I once drew, once cleaned, once adjusted when no one was watching." The crowd stood motionless. A few wiped away tears. An hour later, Jaden walked past the second-floor hallway where the original schematics were being reinstalled. He stopped in front of an emergency power system sketch, hand-drawn by Lila in 1994, now professionally printed, framed, and mounted in the basement corridor. No one dared call her the old cleaning lady anymore. They called her the architect who returned quietly. And that's how she was remembered, not through loud honors or nameplates at the gate, but through every tile and wall she had cleaned for years. The basement layout, once considered an unimportant part of the building, had now been restored according to Lila's original blueprint. A short passage connecting the cold storage area to the emergency stairwell, previously omitted in the 2011 renovation, was now named Lila's Walk. Jaden stood there, hand resting on the new stainless steel railing, thinking of the many times that exact path had allowed Lila to avoid disruption and continue her work without making anyone uncomfortable. Right at the last corner, on the wall, hung a small wooden frame. Inside it was a handwritten note. The handwriting was clear, firm, and recorded Lila's core work ethic. Be on time. Be invisible when needed. Be loud when it matters. But always. always be kind. Jaden read the lines slowly, each word sinking deep into his heart. He returned to the reception area as the clock struck 6 p.m. The last employees were leaving the building. He took the broom hanging on hook number 12, Lila's old hook, and began walking down the long hallway. One step, then another. No one was there to see, but somehow it felt like someone still was. He placed the broom down after 45 minutes, exactly the way Lila used to do it, without fanfare, without needing applause. Back at his office, Jaden powered on his computer and entered one final command into Nova's internal system. In a brief press conference the following morning, in front of the media and the entire board of directors, he declared, "From today onward, the Nova Archive Fund will be renamed the Lila Carter Institute for Quiet Leadership." The entire room rose in applause. No one mentioned the old scandal. No one spoke of those who had erased her name. They only spoke of how a quiet woman had left an unerasable mark on a system she built with her own hands. And that is how a woman once dismissed for her dusty shoes and temporary staff badge left a permanent mark on the heart of an entire corporation. Not through power, but through quiet perseverance. No statues were built in her honor. No champagne was popped. But every blueprint, every safe exit path, every vivid memory of those who once worked beside her became her legacy. If you've ever been sidelined because you didn't look the part, if you've ever contributed quietly without a single word of recognition, then the story of Lila Carter is for you. We may not change the world in a day, but we can start by noticing who's cleaning the floor, who's silently fixing the mistakes others left behind, and who's keeping the whole system running without ever being named. If this story made you feel something, anger, admiration, or just a little more seen, leave a comment below. What are your thoughts about the last janitor? And if you believe in quiet kindness and silent justice, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the stories that truly move us. We tell the stories of the invisible until the whole world has to stop and see them.